Imagine a king, not on a throne of cedar and gold, not surrounded by adoring subjects or protected by a legion of loyal guards. Imagine a king shivering in the damp, claustrophobic darkness of a limestone cave. Outside, the Judean wilderness bakes. Under a merciless sun, inside the air smells of sweat, fear, and cold stone. This man is a national hero. He is the slayer of giants, the champion of Israel. But right now, he is a hunted animal. His name is David, and the man hunting him down with 3,000 elite soldiers is not a foreign invader. It is his king, his mentor, his father-in-law, Saul. David's heart is racing. His breath is shallow. He has done nothing wrong, yet those he loved and protected have turned against him. They are whispering lies in the king's ear. They want him dead. In this exact moment of absolute betrayal, David does not reach for his sword. He reaches for something far more powerful. He reaches for a prayer. This is the untold story behind the most fierce, raw, and desperate poem in human history. This is the historical drama of Psalm 35. To understand the sheer weight of Psalm 35, we have to travel back 3,000 years into the rugged terrain of ancient Israel, specifically to the desert of En Gedi. David was a young man caught in a psychological nightmare. King Saul, consumed by a toxic mixture of paranoia and jealousy, had declared David an enemy of the state. But the physical danger of Saul's army wasn't what cut David the deepest. It was the social and emotional assassination happening behind his back. David was being slandered. Close friends, people he had fed, people he had wept with when they were sick, were now fabricating treasonous lies to win favor with King Saul. They were actively setting a trap for his life. Listen to how David describes this heartbreaking shift in verse 13 and 14. "Yet when they were ill, I put on sackcloth and humbled myself with fasting. I went about mourning as though for my friend or brother." But how did they repay his empathy? Verse 15 reveals the bitter truth. "But when I stumbled, they gathered in glee. Assailants gathered against me without my knowledge. They slandered me without ceasing." Imagine the psychological toll. You are hiding in a wasteland, sleeping on dirt, while the people you considered brothers are laughing at your downfall, rewriting your history, and wishing for your execution. David's world had completely fractured. He was utterly helpless. He couldn't fight back without starting a bloody civil war, which he refused to do. So, cornered in the dark, David unleashes a cry for cosmic justice. When David begins to pray, he doesn't use gentle, comforting language. He uses the brutal, vivid vocabulary of an ancient warrior. He speaks directly to the Almighty, not just as a judge, but as a divine champion. Look at the opening lines of the psalm. "Contend, Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take up shield and armor. Arise and come to my aid. Brandish spear and javelin against those who pursue me." To a modern reader, this sounds like a call to violence. But context changes everything. In the ancient Near East, a king or a tribal leader was legally obligated to defend those who could not defend themselves. By asking God to put on armor, David is making a profound theological statement. "I am completely defenseless. Therefore, God, you must become my shield." David uses three specific, terrifying metaphors rooted in the realities of ancient warfare and survival. First, the chaff in the wind. In verse 5, David prays, "May they be like chaff before the wind, with the angel of the Lord driving them away." In ancient Israel, threshing floors were built on top of hills to catch the evening breeze. Farmers would throw crushed wheat into the air. The heavy grain would fall to the ground, but the worthless, weightless husks, the chaff, would be violently blown away into oblivion. David is praying that his enemies' elaborate plots will prove to be completely weightless, scattered by the breath of God. Second, the dark and slippery path. Verse 6 reads, "May their path be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them." The Judean wilderness is filled with treacherous, narrow limestone ledges hanging over sheer drops of hundreds of feet. To walk these paths in the dark, while wet and slippery, is a death sentence. David is asking that the very traps his enemies laid for him become the terrain of their own ruin. And third, the hidden net. Verse 7. Since they hid their net for me without cause, and without cause dug a pit for me, let ruin overtake them by surprise. Ancient hunters would dig deep pits, cover them with fragile branches, and conceal a net over the top to capture lions or wild beasts. David felt exactly like that, a targeted target, walking through a minefield of unseen social traps. But Psalm 35 is not just a song of anger. It is a masterclass in psychological survival. If you look closely at the structure of the text, something incredible happens. David is trapped in a loop of pain, but he forces his mind to look past the immediate crisis. 3 separate times in this poem, David stops focusing on his enemies and makes a vow about the future. In verse 9, he says, "Then my soul will rejoice in the Lord and delight in his salvation." And again in verse 28, "My tongue will proclaim your righteousness and your praises all day long." Think about the profound faith required to write those words. David is still in the cave. Saul's army is still outside. The slanderers are still talking. Nothing has physically changed. Yet David speaks of his deliverance in the past tense. He is so certain that justice will prevail that he pre-records his song of thanksgiving while he is still bleeding from the betrayal. He refuses to let the cruelty of his enemies dictate the condition of his soul. History tells us that David's long night in the wilderness eventually came to an end. The traps failed. Saul's kingdom collapsed under its own weight. And David finally stepped out of the shadows of the caves and onto the throne of Jerusalem. He became Israel's greatest king, but his ultimate victory wasn't political. It was literary and spiritual. The empire David built has long since crumbled into dust. The weapons of his enemies are buried under layers of archaeological debris. But the words he whispered in the dark are still alive. 3,000 years later, Psalm 35 has traveled across oceans, cultures, and centuries. It has been prayed by political prisoners in solitary confinement. It has been wept over by people experiencing the devastating pain of a broken marriage or a toxic workplace betrayal. It is the ultimate anthem for anyone who has ever felt completely misunderstood, falsely accused, or utterly defenseless. When you feel like you have no voice left to defend yourself, David's ancient prayer stands ready to speak for you. It reminds us that history is long, that justice is patient, and that even the darkest cave is not a burial ground. It is just a temporary shelter until the storm passes. The next time you find yourself surrounded by a crisis you did not cause, remember, the king in the Judean dirt. Lay down your weapons, look up, and let the ancient warrior's prayer fight for you.